That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, let's go through. Let's talk about the players that have risen most with their fantasy value. We're going to do it like breaking it into the first half of the season and the second half of the season. So I'm going to be looking at weeks 1 through 5, points per game at running back, wide receiver. We'll throw in a tight end as well. We're going to be comparing the biggest risers from the second half of the season in weeks 6 through 10. And we're going to be talking about, should we be selling this player high? Should we be riding it out and be extremely happy that we had this bump in production to begin with? But of course, before we dive into it, make sure you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And also, when you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. Let's give out our winners for Balti Plays and Ben today. Of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. And one other thing, the best way you can support the channel here is by going over and deciding to sign up for Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FLOCK, you actually get your first deposit match dollar for dollar up to $100. So please make sure you take advantage of that offer. And also, I've had a lot of people reaching out to us saying they had no idea they could even do Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy, it's not like sports betting. You don't have to have your state legal for sports betting. It's DFS. If you can go through, if you can submit a DraftKings lineup, if you can submit a FanDuel lineup, it's the same thing with Underdog Fantasy. You can go get in some fantasy drafts that they're doing week to week. I mean, you can go draft the team just for week 11. You could also go through, check out some really cool player props that they have. Like in Florida, we can't do online sports betting. I do Underdog Fantasy every single day, pretty much. Of course, go sign up for that. And let's go through, let's dive into these running backs first off. First running back, just to give you an example of what we're doing, Jonathan Taylor. Not going to talk about him in depth. Everybody knows Jonathan Taylor. You're looking at him as that top tier running back. I don't even need to say anything with Taylor, but just to give you an example of what we're doing here. So through the first 5 weeks this season, Jonathan Taylor on a points per game basis was the running back 11. Now, if we're going to be looking at since then, if we're looking at weeks 6 through 10, he's the running back 1. He went from scoring 16.8 points per game to now 25.7. So that's an example here of a running back that clearly skyrocketed with his own fantasy value. Just in case you aren't signed up for the flock on Patreon, I can give you an idea of where we have him ranked in our rest of season rankings. I currently have Jonathan Taylor in that same tier as Christian McCaffrey, Najee Harris. I think you could rank those running backs any way that you would like, even though I know 9 out of 10 people would have it as Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, then Najee Harris. I think with the Najee Harris workload, he is such a high floor. I'm all in on Harris, but of course, we're not going to be diving into that right now. I don't need to be justifying my love for Najee Harris. Let's just move on to our next running back. Let's talk about someone that actually needs some discussion centering around him. Let's go over to Michael Carter. And with Carter, I honestly think he's gone under the radar a little bit here. Now, James, let me give a massive shout out to James. I've been coming out in the live streams every single night. Of course, thank you so much, my friend. I mean, he is all in on the Michael Carter hype train. And honestly, I think I'm a little late to the party here to be that excited with Michael Carter because he's been fantastic. Like, if you're going to look at the first 5 weeks, of course, you're going to be assuming that that rookie running back drafted on day 3, just like what we said with Ramondre Stevenson, and that he was going to continue to expand his role at the end of the season. Very similar to Michael Carter here. You're not expecting that day 3 running back to come out and all of a sudden be one of those top level players. He was the running back 44 on a points per game basis, weeks 1 through 5. Since then, oh my gosh, he takes a massive jump up on a points per game basis. Michael Carter was actually the running back 7 over this past month. And that includes Matt Breida, who, I mean, clearly only had 1 game of top-end production. So I think you can remove him out of the sample. And in that instance, Michael Carter was the running back 6 on a points per game basis. I mean, a consistent force at the running back position. And it's because the workload. The workload has drastically changed. Now, it first changed with Tevin Coleman getting injured and Tevin Coleman leaving this offense. And that was like the catalyst here to boost Michael Carter up into that starting role. And I'm not going to lie, this past week against the Buffalo Bills, I was coming out and I was hesitant to tell people to play Michael Carter. We had him as a top 24 running back, but I thought with Tevin Coleman coming back in and with how bad the matchup was, that we wanted to wait and see what the Tevin Coleman workload would look like. We wanted to wait and see if Tevin Coleman would come out and steal 3 to 4 carries out of the backfield for Michael Carter. And if he would go down to only getting 8 to 9 carries, we weren't going to be that interested in a horrible matchup. Nonetheless, it doesn't matter. Coleman comes back into this offense. Coleman just takes that role 1-for-1 from Ty Johnson. Ty Johnson's completely erased. You have a very stable role here with Michael Carter. And yes, it's one of the worst offenses in the NFL. But to be honest, it doesn't matter when you're getting the receiving workload that Carter has. Now, this is a running back that since week 4, 13, 10, 11, 15, 13, 16 carries. And of course, you're never going to be expecting Michael Carter to be an extremely efficient running back, running between the tackles. Not necessarily anything on Carter himself. It's more so based on the offensive environment that he's in. You know, when you're playing in an offense that, has atrocious quarterback play, that those opposing defensive backs, they're not going to have to give a ton of respect. They can actually bring a safety down. They can actually stack the box against these running backs. So the efficiency with Michael Carter is always going to be pretty low. Right now he's averaging about 3.6 yards per carry. Nothing against Carter. That's just the offensive environment. We know yards per carry is a horrendous stat to be measuring a running back's talent with so many variables going into that one statistic. But what you love to see with Carter is the workload in the receiving game. Since the bye week in week 6, Carter, 9, 14, 2, and 6 targets. Since that bye week, Michael Carter has come out. Let's see if I can do some simple math on the spot here. That's about 31 targets through 4 weeks. That's close to 8 targets a game. I'm going to assume 7.75 targets a game. If that's correct, I'm a genius. Nonetheless, here with Carter, when you have that kind of workload as a receiver, you are just having such a high floor in a PPR format. And I feel like because Michael Carter is playing for the New York Jets, I feel like because, this hasn't been discussed that much, Carter maybe is a little bit undervalued here in fantasy. Now, we've had him as that mid running back 2 in our rest of season rankings for quite a while. We've had him as our running back 18. I think there's an argument to be made for me to move Michael Carter up even past that. I think there's an argument to be made that Michael Carter in a full PPR format should be alongside Darrell Henderson, should be alongside James Robinson. And as I make this video over there on Patreon, I'm actually going to move Michael Carter up over Cordell Patterson and James Conner in our rest of season rankings. Comparing him to Conner. Conner will be more productive over the next month, but obviously Carter over Conner will have the production in the fantasy football playoffs. So I'm going to be moving Michael Carter up to my running back 16 here. And I think there are a lot of leagues where you could go through, you could trade Elijah Mitchell plus a small piece, go get Michael Carter. And that makes so much sense in a full PPR format if you're looking at Carter as someone that's getting close to almost 7 to 8 targets a game. Now let's go over to our next running back, someone that obviously has increased in value as the season's gone on. I feel like, honestly, this is still a player that you can trade for at a reasonable price tag, Leonard Fournette. Now, with Leonard Fournette, he was the running back 20 in the first half of the season. If you're going to look at a points per game basis of what we have seen since then, he was the running back 11 in weeks 6 through 10. So Leonard Fournette went from being that mid to low end running back 2 to now he's a consistent low end running back 1. And the workload here is perfect. Now, he is a running back that, honestly, I want to say Fournette has gotten a little unlucky with his touchdown rate so far this season. Knowing the style of a running back that Leonard Fournette is, knowing the size that he has, off a workload where he has 48 targets out of the backfield and 112 carries, you would naturally assume that maybe Leonard Fournette is up there at 6-7 touchdowns so far in the season. Well, that hasn't happened. He's sitting there at 4. And I will say, we can't naturally assume the touchdown rate's going to be coming up for Leonard Fournette because I really think that Bruce Arians, Tom Brady, I think they're trying to just, I don't want to say pad Tom Brady's stats, but you're seeing this offense. The perfect example is they're up 35-3 against the Chicago Bears. It's 4th and goal. They're going for it to try to get Tom Brady another passing touchdown. Clearly they're trying to pour on the stats. They're trying to get Tom Brady some records here. So maybe this is an offense that's going to continue to throw the ball when they're on the 3-yard line. They really don't care to hand it off to Leonard Fournette. Doesn't really matter though. In a PPR format, Fournette has had 48 targets through 9 weeks so far this season. He's averaging over 5 targets a game. That's been trending in the right direction. And Giovanni Bernard, more and more, is just being removed from this offense. Obviously, Ronald Jones is not a running back that you have to worry about any really significant touches going in his way. And I will say, with Fournette, I was a little hesitant to buy into this right away. Going back to week 4, once he started to have this role against the New England Patriots, I actually was saying, okay, you know what? I don't want to buy into it right away. I can't just assume this is going to happen, because we remember back in 2020, this was an offense that kind of went back and forth with who the starting running back was. I mean, at one point, Leonard Fournette was a healthy scratch in Tampa. It doesn't really matter when he has this workload. One thing that I really want to point out, the perfect example is 0.2 Leonard Fournette versus someone like Elijah Mitchell. Now, if you're looking at my rest of season rankings, we currently have Leonard Fournette as our running back 12 over there on Patreon, only behind Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley. Now, if we're going to be looking at some running backs behind him that I think maybe we can move for Leonard Fournette right now. Like if we could go through, if we could try to package together Elijah Mitchell and then another top 24 wide receiver. Like say if you can go through and you could try to package together Elijah Mitchell and then a wide receiver in the range of someone like Jerry Jeudy and get Leonard Fournette, that's going to be massive, because the perfect example of how important this usage in the receiving game that Leonard Fournette has is with Fournette this past week. Pretty bad week where this team trails the entire day against the Washington football team. We know the Washington football team has one of the best defenses against the rush so far this season. Fournette comes out. He has 11 carries and 47 rushing yards, and he doesn't even score a touchdown this game. Yet at the same time, he's able to be a high-end running back too. I mean, he was a running back 1 this past week, dropping 17 points because he gets 9 targets out of the backfield. He gets 8 receptions, 45 receiving yards. So it's ugly the way he gets there. Like if you're comparing him to Elijah Mitchell, on the other hand, with Elijah Mitchell, this is a running back that comes out. I mean, you would assume that he just dominates in fantasy with 27 carries. But at the end of the day, when he doesn't get a single target out of the backfield with 27 carries, his 91 rushing yards equals 9 fantasy points. Leonard Fournette is essentially doubling that. It's just massive here. I think that Fournette's another running back that, yeah, his price point has gone up a ton. But given the offense that he's playing in, given the role that he has, I wouldn't mind going and just paying a premium on Leonard Fournette, just like I wouldn't mind going and paying a premium on our next running back, someone that y'all know I already have in essentially every league. We are drafting him in the second round with aggression this past season, Joe Mixon. Now, Joe Mixon, the first half of the season, he was the running back 19 on a points per game basis. And if you're looking at since then, if you're looking at, I mean, just over the past 5 weeks, Joe Mixon's the running back 3 in fantasy on a points per game basis, only behind Alvin Kamara and Jonathan Taylor. And with Joe Mixon here, one thing that I really want to highlight is the fact that at the beginning part of the season, it's not like Joe Mixon was even a bad running back. It's not like this was a running back that has completely changed the way he was playing. It's just we had some random games here for Joe Mixon where it was so hard to evaluate exactly who he was, because going back in week 4 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, remember, he injures his ankle near the end of that game. He injures his ankle in the fourth quarter. Samaje Perine actually gets a couple drives as, I mean, the primary running back for Cincinnati. So essentially we can toss week 4 against Jacksonville out the window for Joe Mixon. And then remember, back in week 5 for Joe Mixon, this was someone that didn't practice all week. I was expecting him to miss. Somehow he goes out there. He doesn't miss a single game. He plays in week 5 against the Green Bay Packers. He comes out and splits the backfield damn near 50-50 with Samaje Perine. So that's another week that we can just throw out the window here. So essentially, I think that if we're looking at Joe Mixon, there are 2 weeks that are just completely bogus, that if we remove them from the sample, we may be able to get a better idea of who Joe Mixon actually is. So he scored 159 points so far this year. Let's go through and let's remove what we actually had with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and let's also remove what we had with the Green Bay Packers games to see exactly how many points that he would have scored on a per game basis without those. Okay, so now he's played a total of 7 weeks outside of that. That's going to be him averaging 19.25 fantasy points per game. You're going to be looking at where that would have put him throughout the entire season if he was able to average 19.25 fantasy points. I feel like we're not cherry picking stats here. I feel like this is a very legit thing to do. And he would be the running back 7 behind Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris. He'd be right ahead of DeAndre Swift, Ezekiel Elliott. He would be ahead of Ezekiel Elliott here. Now, if you're looking at our rest of season rankings, I don't have Joe Mixon quite that high. I instead have Joe Mixon at running back 9, but with Mixon, I mean, you know that he is a running back that has the perfect workload. We said it before the season that Joe Mixon was going to have the same exact workload as Ezekiel Elliott when you remove Giovanni Bernard for the Cincinnati Bengals offense. Funny to see that Joe Mixon maybe even has a better workload, but obviously the Dallas Cowboys offense is a little bit better, so I have Ezekiel Elliott ranked 2 spots higher. Nonetheless, going forward, Mixon has some great matchups. I mean, he still gets to play the Chargers. There are a couple tough defenses in there, but more so tough passing defenses for the Cincinnati Bengals. It looks like maybe they're going to be leaning on Joe Mixon in the second half. So I think you can be really excited about what you have from Mixon as well. There are honestly no clear sell high candidates for all these running backs that have skyrocketed in value, because I think there are no underlying numbers that indicate that maybe the touchdown rate scales back, maybe that we should see these running backs be disappointing going forward. I honestly love all these guys at this point. Now, our next wide receiver that I'm a pretty big fan of is going to be Michael Pittman. And then with Michael Pittman, talk about someone having that late season breakout. Let me go through, let's set up the parameters. So over the past 5 weeks, Michael Pittman actually has been the wide receiver 12 on a per game basis. That's including only a 1-game sample from Antonio Brown, which we can toss that out the window. So essentially, Michael Pittman's been the wide receiver 11 over the past month or so. And if we're going to be looking at what he was at the beginning part of the season, Michael Pittman was actually a mid wide receiver 3 down there sitting at the wide receiver 29. I mean, he has come out and he has broken out not only with the efficiency he has seen, but also with the fact that this offense has just been drastically better for the Indianapolis Colts. And it makes sense that they were significantly better, because think about what this offense was dealing with coming into the season. They were dealing with a Quentin Nelson injury in the preseason. I stand by the fact that I think Nelson is one of, if not the most important players for this entire offense. I mean, Quentin Nelson, I think you can make the argument that he's the best offensive lineman in the entire NFL here. So the injury to Nelson is massive. Also, remember, when Carson Wentz suffered that injury initially, we thought that Carson Wentz was going to be missing 5 to 6 weeks this season. You thought that you were going to be without Carson Wentz for at least a month. Somehow he comes back right away. Reports are saying that he's clearly not going to be 100%. I mean, he wasn't 100%, but I think that maybe excuses the lack of production that maybe we got for the first month of the season for the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor just go absolutely bananas over the coming weeks. One thing I will say real quick is they're about to have some really tough matchups over the next 2 weeks. You have Jonathan Taylor against the Bills, the Bucks the next 2 weeks. Same thing with Michael Pittman. So I know a lot of people are probably going to be upset with us that we have Najee Harris ranked over him. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to continue to have Najee Harris ranked over Jonathan Taylor. We're talking Michael Pittman here nonetheless. So I will say maybe we see this scaled back just slightly for Pittman, and that his matchups coming up are actually going to be significantly tougher than what he has currently had. Of course, you're not going to be able to go out there and trade him as if he's a low-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy. If you could do that, you do it, no question. Nobody's paying that price tag. However, if we're looking at my rankings, I currently have Michael Pittman as wide receiver 17 rest of season. The wide receivers we have directly ahead of Michael Pittman that I'd be willing to trade him for include Amari Cooper, include Terry McLaurin. I actually think you could probably get those deals done. And also, if you are a contending team, for the love of God, go see if we can trade Michael Pittman for DeAndre Hopkins right now. That would also be a no-brainer. Go get Evans, go get Godwin. If not, you're just going to be holding on to Michael Pittman. We have him ranked directly ahead of Hollywood, Deontay, Tyler Lockett, and Antonio Brown. Now, our next wide receiver we're going to be bringing up will honestly be the first player that I think we can say, you're not selling this week, but after this week, I think we will go through. We will look to sell him high. Jaylen Waddle. Now, with Jaylen Waddle, through the first month of the season, he was the wide receiver 47 on a points per game basis. He comes out over the past month. He's been the wide receiver 18. So he has been a mid wide receiver 2 in fantasy. And reminder, I mean, Jaylen Waddle has been a wide receiver we've talked about at length so far this season. And it's so easy to know when you start Jaylen Waddle or not. I mean, do you have Devontae Parker and Will Fuller playing? If so, you're not starting Jaylen Waddle. If you have no Devontae Parker, if you have no Will Fuller, you're playing Jaylen Waddle everywhere you can. Looking at Jaylen Waddle, I mean, this was a wide receiver that, yes, maybe we said to sell high going into that Buffalo Bills game once you were getting Devontae Parker back in. In that Bills game, Waddle had 6 fantasy points, so I was like, maybe we weren't that wrong in that. But now I think this week against the Jets, you're starting him as a top 24 wide receiver. I'd be a lot more excited about someone like Jaylen Waddle compared to what I may be with someone like Devonta Smith, if we're going to be completely honest. I think that he will be a player, however, that you have to know that we are getting Devontae Parker back in soon. We're getting Will Fuller back in soon. If we're going to be comparing the weeks that we had with Will Fuller in this offense, we've only seen 2 of them. And if we're going to be looking at the weeks where we had Devontae Parker, Will Fuller, and Jaylen Waddle all good to go, Waddle's averaging about 10 points per game in that contest. If you're even just looking at the weeks that Devontae Parker played, yeah, I mean, Jaylen Waddle is about 10 points per game. That's significantly lower than where he's been outside of that one split. So with Waddle, I'm going to be playing him this week. We're going to expect a massive week against the New York Jets and a soft defense, but then knowing that we will most likely get Will Fuller and Devontae Parker coming back in sometime soon. After that, I think we would go through and look to sell. And now our last player is going to be someone that I said not to start this past week because you had Eric Ebron coming back in, but Pat Freimuth. And yeah, we wanted to avoid him this past week because we had Eric Ebron coming back in. At the same time, you had no Ben Roethlisberger in this offense, so you had to have pretty low expectations. I will say I think we got lucky with Pat Freimuth telling you not to start him. I mean, this is an option that he still had a decent game. He still had 5 receptions, 31 receiving yards. Could have been a lot better, though, because he had 9 targets in this game with Mason Rudolph at quarterback. Eric Ebron clearly has shown that he is going to be nothing. I think with Pat Freimuth, oh my gosh, he has been fantastic. Over the past month, Pat Freimuth, keep in mind I'm looking at a points per game from a tight end premium league, so it's a little bit different than what you'd actually have in a regular format. But Pat Freimuth is the tight end 3 on a points per game basis, only behind Travis Kelce and George Kittle. This is someone that's had the volume in Pittsburgh as well. He's had 7 targets, 6 targets, 9 targets over the past month. Yes, the touchdown rate's not going to keep up this high, even though he's proven that he is a great red zone threat. With Freimuth, he's going to continue to move up our tight end rankings. Currently, you're looking at Pat Freimuth in our tight end rankings. I think we actually probably have to have him about tight end 13 right next to Dawson Knox. I still would prefer someone like, you know what? I think I kind of have to tell you to sell Dan Arnold here. I'm sorry, Pat Freimuth. And that's because our next tight end, Dan Arnold, I think is even more interesting than what you actually have with Freimuth. And the reason for that is if you're looking at Dan Arnold, the volume's been better. And with Dan Arnold, this is someone that is due for some positive touchdown regression. I think that Dan Arnold right now, I mean, he has risen the most in our tight end rankings throughout this entire season. He is right now my tight end 8 in our rest of season rankings. And let's just remind everybody, I mean, this is someone that is 6'6". And yes, the touchdown rate will be a little bit lower than league average for a tight end just because how bad this Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense is. But nonetheless, if you remove that first week in Jacksonville, he got traded. He played on Thursday night. That's not something you can hold against him. He's had 8 targets, 5 targets, 10, 7, 8. He's had 60 receiving yards in 4 out of 5 weeks in that time period as well. For your tight end to consistently get 7 to 8 targets a game, for him to come away with 60 receiving yards, he has a floor that not many tight ends can reach in fantasy. Not to mention that once Dan Arnold starts scoring touchdowns, as you would naturally assume, a tight end that's getting this kind of volume would be scoring touchdowns at a decent rate. I think Arnold can bust onto the scene everywhere. So, you know what? I'm probably selling Pat Freimuth, but that's just because how in love I am with Dan Arnold, and I think we can make that swap everywhere. And of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. I really hope that this podcast was able to help you out. I really hope that you got something from this. And you know, we'll be live tonight. We'll be live tomorrow night. We'll be live every single day for the rest of the season. So make sure that you hit that bell next to the subscribe button. And also make sure if you want to support the channel, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, they match you dollar for dollar on that deposit up to a $100 deposit. So please take advantage of that. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.